literally kneeing and cheap shotting C in the throat. Like if she did that to any of our teammates, we'd be pissed. But like they're definitely targeting her, and the league and the refs do not.
The internet is not a real place. So I think when you treat the internet like a real place, that's when you get everybody like, oh my God. But it's like, bro, you don't know these people in real life. Just press the block button, bro. Just press the block button and then move on. Like
about the suspension, if that's what they felt was necessary in that moment, then so be it. But I think there's a lot of other plays that you can say the same about. I think the biggest thing is it's just about our safety. We're so concerned about the safety on the court, but time and time again we're having people threatening our lives, leaking addresses out there, putting crazy pictures that have nothing to do with basketball. So at some point the league needs to put a stand on it. They came out with no hate speech, but I mean, what is that going to do? At some point, time and time again players are going through this and the league remains silent. So I'm sick and tired of it, and it's time for them.
Something is rotting inside the WNBA, and the smell has finally reached everyone's nostrils. What started as whispers about rough play and biased officiating has exploded into something nobody in that front office can contain anymore. Players are speaking out. Legends are breaking their silence. And the one person sitting at the center of all of it, Caitlin Clark, keeps showing up, keeps performing, and keeps getting targeted while the people responsible for protecting her look the other way. This isn't just a story about one dirty play during one regular season game. This is a story about jealousy, power, cowardice, and a league that is actively sabotaging its own survival. By the time you finish watching this, you are going to see the WNBA in a completely different light. And what you find might genuinely make your blood boil. June 24th. Indiana Fever versus Phoenix Mercury. For most of the night, it looked like a competitive regular season game. Two teams battling for positioning, trading buckets, playing with intensity. Nothing out of the ordinary, at least on the surface. But then came a moment that would be replayed millions of times across every platform on the internet, dissected frame by frame, and spark a controversy so explosive that it cracked the entire foundation of the league wide open. Alyssa Thomas and Caitlin Clark ended up tangled near the baseline. Clark went down to the floor, completely off the ball, no threat to anyone, just a player trying to get back up. And that is the moment Thomas made a choice, not a basketball play, a choice. She drove a closed fist directly into Clark's throat. A targeted, deliberate strike to one of the most vulnerable parts of the human body. The kind of hit that in any other context, in any other public setting, would have consequences that go far beyond a post-game press conference. But Thomas wasn't finished. She followed it up with a knee directly into Clark's midsection, two separate acts, two separate moments of decision. This was not the chaos of two players fighting for a rebound. This was not an accidental elbow thrown in the heat of a post-battle. Clark was already on the ground. The play was over. And Thomas made a deliberate choice to inflict pain on a player who was in no position to defend herself. What makes this even more infuriating is how Clark responded. She didn't retaliate. She didn't escalate. She absorbed it, got back up, and kept playing. That level of composure under that kind of provocation is remarkable, but it also raises an uncomfortable question. How many times has she had to show that composure? How many times has she taken a hit, swallowed the frustration, and moved on because she knows that if she reacts, she becomes the story? The broadcast cameras caught everything in high definition. There was no angle missing, no moment of ambiguity. You could see the sequence clearly. The fist, the knee, the complete absence of any acknowledgement from Thomas. No look back, no check, no gesture of any kind. She walked away like nothing happened. And in that moment, you could feel the entire fan base collectively holding its breath, waiting for a whistle, waiting for someone in a position of authority to step in and say that what just happened was completely unacceptable. The whistle never came, the call never came, and Clark, once again, was left to handle it entirely on her own. What happened next would send shockwaves not just through the basketball world, but through sports media as a whole. Because when the people who are supposed to enforce the rules refuse to do their jobs, someone else always steps into that vacuum. And in this case, the fallout from that no call became a story far bigger than the play itself. The referees saw everything. Let that sink in for a second, because the next part of this story is where things go from infuriating to something that feels almost deliberately designed. And once you see it laid out, the incompetence excuse starts to fall completely apart. Every professional sport operates on a basic, foundational promise to its fans. The rules will be enforced. The officials will do their jobs. And while no referee is perfect, there is an understanding that egregious, visible, undeniable violations will be caught and penalized. That promise was shattered on June 24th in a way that is genuinely difficult to rationalize. Referee Jenna Schroeder was not on the other side of the court. She was not blocked by a wall of bodies fighting for a rebound. She was positioned less than 10 feet away from the play. 10 feet. In a professional arena with bright lighting, high-definition broadcast cameras capturing every angle, and zero obstruction between her line of sight and the moment of impact. Schroeder was staring directly at the sequence as it unfolded. The broadcast footage tells the whole story. You can see her eyes tracking the play. You can see her in frame as the fist connects with Clark's throat. And then you can see her do absolutely nothing. No whistle, no stoppage, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had just occurred. The game continued as if the moment never happened. Now referees miss calls. It happens in every sport at every level. Missed calls are part of the game, and most reasonable fans understand that. But there is a significant difference between missing a borderline blocking or charging call in the middle of a scramble and standing 10 feet away from a closed fist strike to a player's throat and calling it nothing. These are not comparable situations. One requires split-second judgment under chaotic conditions. The other requires simply having your eyes open and doing your job. The WNBA's response to the officiating failure was essentially silence. No formal acknowledgement that the no call was an error. No statement addressing why a play that clear, that visible, and that dangerous was allowed to pass without consequence. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like an oversight. It feels like a decision. And here is where the narrative shifts from incompetence into something more troubling. Because this was not the first time Clark had been on the receiving end of a rough play that officials chose to overlook. Throughout this season, there has been a documented pattern of physical play directed at Clark going uncalled, while minor reactions from Clark or her teammates draw immediate whistles. Fans have been cataloging it. Analysts have been discussing it. The evidence is sitting in highlight reels across the entire internet. When a pattern becomes that consistent, the word accident starts to lose its meaning. Accidents happen once, maybe twice. A pattern is something else entirely. And when that pattern involves the most high-profile player in the league, the player responsible for a historic surge in viewership, ticket sales, and merchandise revenue, the stakes of getting it wrong are astronomically higher than in any ordinary officiating dispute. Sophie Cunningham put it plainly when she spoke to the media. She confirmed what fans had been saying for months. Clark is being targeted, and the referees are not stepping in to stop it. When a veteran player from another team feels compelled to say that publicly, knowing full well the professional risk that comes with breaking locker room norms, it carries enormous weight. This wasn't a hot take on social media. This was a professional athlete with years of experience in the league telling the world that something is deeply wrong with how the game is being called. The question that nobody in the front office seems willing to answer is a simple one. If the officiating failures are truly accidental, why is the pattern so consistent? Why does it always seem to tilt in the same direction? And why, when the evidence is this visible and this overwhelming, does the league's response amount to nothing more than silence and a one-game slap on the wrist? The answer to that question lives in the next part of this story, and it is even more uncomfortable than what we have covered so far. Because the punishment handed down by the league didn't just fail to address the problem. It may have made everything significantly worse. When the WNBA finally spoke, the basketball world leaned in. Fans who had spent days flooding social media with demands for accountability, analysts who had spent hours breaking down the footage frame by frame, players who had watched the incident unfold in real time, all of them waiting to see whether the league would draw a line or quietly step over it. The league handed Alyssa Thomas a one-game suspension. One game? for a closed fist strike to the throat, followed by a deliberate knee to the midsection of a player who was already on the ground. The reaction was immediate, and it was volcanic. Not just from Caitlin Clark's fanbase, not just from casual observers who had only recently discovered women's basketball, but from longtime WNBA supporters, sports journalists, and former players who understood exactly what that number communicated. One game doesn't say we take player safety seriously. One game doesn't say this behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. One game says the cost of targeting the league's most valuable player is roughly 40 minutes on the bench. To put that into proper context, consider how other leagues handle situations of comparable severity. In the NBA, Draymond Green has been suspended multiple times for conduct that, on video, appears less overtly violent than what Thomas did to Clark. The NBA has handed out multi-game suspensions for flagrant fouls, for altercations, for behavior that disrupts the integrity of competition. The message those suspensions send is deliberate. This is where the line is. Cross it, and the consequences will be meaningful. The WNBA's one-game suspension sends the exact opposite message. It essentially communicates that if you want to physically punish Caitlin Clark, the price of admission is one missed game. For players who may already feel resentment toward Clark for the attention and revenue she brings to a league they have been grinding in for years, that is not a deterrent. That is practically an invitation. The timing of how Thomas found out about the suspension made the whole situation even more bizarre. She revealed publicly that she learned about the suspension just 10 minutes before it was announced on social media. No formal conversation with league officials, no explanation of the reasoning, no dialogue. Just a notification that it was happening, and then it was public. That is not how a professionally run organization handles discipline. That is how an organization handles something it wants to get through as quickly and quietly as possible. And then there is the broader pattern of punishment that makes the one-game suspension feel even more insulting. Clark herself received a technical foul during the same stretch of games simply for reacting to the abuse. A reaction earned a technical. An assault earned one game. If you're trying to understand what the WNBA values and what it doesn't, those two data points tell you almost everything you need to know. The league had an opportunity here. A genuine, significant opportunity to show the millions of new fans who have tuned in this season because of Caitlin Clark that the product they are investing their time and money into is worth protecting. That the player responsible for transforming the league's financial reality is valued, protected, and treated with the basic dignity that any star athlete deserves. They didn't take that opportunity. They buried it under a single-game suspension and hoped the news cycle would move on. It didn't move on, because 4 days later, a player stepped in front of a microphone and said what the league refused to say. And the moment she opened her mouth, everything changed. There is an unwritten rule in professional sports that players settle their disagreements internally. You handle things in the locker room, behind closed doors, away from cameras and microphones. You don't air the league's dirty laundry in public. You don't call out officials or opposing players in press conferences. You stay in your lane, protect the brotherhood or sisterhood of the game, and trust that the people running the league will handle whatever needs to be handled. Sophie Cunningham looked at that unwritten rule, weighed it against what she had just watched happen to Caitlin Clark, and decided it wasn't worth following anymore. What Cunningham did takes a specific kind of courage that people outside of professional sports don't always appreciate. She wasn't just giving a spicy quote to generate headlines. She was fully aware that stepping in front of that microphone and saying what she said could result in a fine from the league. She was aware that her words would be scrutinized, clipped, shared, and debated across every sports media platform in the country. She was aware that some people inside the league ecosystem would view what she was doing as a betrayal of professional norms. She did it anyway, because what she watched happen to Clark wasn't something she could stay quiet about. Cunningham confirmed directly, and without any coded language, that Clark is being specifically targeted in the league. She used the word targeted, not roughed up, not playing physical defense. Targeted. She described the knee to the throat and the cheap shots for exactly what they were, deliberate acts designed to hurt a specific player. And she made the point that if anyone had done that to one of her own teammates, the reaction from her and everyone around her would have been immediate and furious. That framing matters enormously, because what Cunningham did in that moment was strip away every excuse that Thomas, the Mercury organization, and the league had been hiding behind. The accident narrative, the "it's just physical basketball" narrative, the "fans are overreacting" narrative. Cunningham dismantled all of it in a matter of sentences by applying the most basic test of fairness. Would this have been acceptable if it happened to anyone else? The answer, as she made absolutely clear, is no. The significance of a player speaking out in defense of someone on the opposing team cannot be overstated. These are competitors. They battle each other for wins, for playoff seeding, for roster spots in a league where the margins are razor thin. The locker room code exists precisely because the competitive environment makes it feel necessary. When Cunningham crossed that line, she wasn't doing it for attention or for social media engagement. She was doing it because what she witnessed had gone beyond basketball and entered territory that she felt morally obligated to address. Her comments also confirmed something that fans had been raising for months, but that the league had consistently deflected and minimized. The targeting of Clark isn't random. It isn't a byproduct of competitive play. It is a pattern, and people inside the league are fully aware that it is happening. Cunningham's willingness to say that publicly, on the record, in front of cameras, is the kind of confirmation that changes the conversation entirely. What is also striking about Cunningham's response is the contrast it draws with how the league's leadership has handled the situation. While the commissioner stayed silent and the front office issued minimal statements, a player, someone with actual skin in the game, someone who competes against Clark and has no particular reason to protect her outside of basic human decency, stepped up and did what the people in power refused to do. That contrast is damning, and it leads directly to the most powerful and most controversial figure in this entire saga. The woman who sits at the top of the WNBA and whose silence, many argue, is not neutral at all. Because silence at that level is always a statement. And this particular silence has been deafening. After the suspension was handed down and the internet had spent several days making its feelings extremely clear, Alyssa Thomas walked up to the podium. The world was watching. Fans who had seen the footage dozens of times were waiting to hear what she would say. An apology, an acknowledgement, even just a basic expression of concern for a fellow player's well-being. Something that would indicate some level of reflection on what had happened. What they got was something else entirely. Thomas did not address the punch. She did not address the knee. She did not acknowledge Clark by name in any meaningful way. Instead, she pivoted immediately to the online response to the incident, framing herself as the victim of internet harassment and demanding that the league step in to protect players from social media abuse. She described the play as a complete accident, something that she implied only became controversial because of how it was characterized online, rather than because of what the footage clearly showed. The pivot was so swift and so complete that it almost had to be admired for its audacity. Within minutes of standing at that podium, Thomas had transformed a conversation about her own behavior into a platform for grievances about fan conduct. And while online harassment of athletes is a genuine and serious issue that absolutely deserves attention, using it in that specific moment as a deflection from accountability for a play that millions of people had watched with their own eyes was a strategic choice that did not go unnoticed. Thomas made another claim that landed poorly with virtually everyone who had seen the tape. She suggested that the players involved were being painted as thugs, implying that the criticism directed at her was rooted in something beyond the play itself. It is a serious allegation, and it deserves to be taken seriously as a general concern in sports media. But in this specific context, directed at a specific incident that had been caught on camera in undeniable detail, it read as an attempt to reframe the conversation away from the behavior and toward the reaction to the behavior. The Phoenix Mercury organization did not help matters. Head coach Nate Tibbetts stood in front of the media and told fans, with a straight face, that calling the play's cheap shots was ridiculous. He suggested that people were relying on social media screenshots rather than proper context. In a world where the actual broadcast footage was available on every major sports platform, telling fans to distrust their own eyes landed as one of the more remarkable pieces of media management in recent sports memory. The organizational circling of the wagons around Thomas was predictable in one sense. Teams protect their players. That is part of how professional sports organizations function, and nobody expects a head coach to throw a player under the bus in a press conference. But there is a difference between defending a player's character and actively telling the public that what they watched did not happen the way they think it happened. One is loyalty. The other is something closer to gaslighting. What the Mercury's response ultimately revealed is that accountability was never going to come from within that organization. Thomas wasn't going to apologize. Tibbetts wasn't going to acknowledge the severity of what happened. The expectation of the league to intervene was never going to be satisfied by the people directly involved, which meant all eyes shifted to the one person with the actual authority to set the standard, draw the line, and send a message to every player in the league about what will and will not be tolerated. That person has been conspicuously, almost impressively, absent from this entire conversation, and her absence is starting to look less like restraint and more like a choice. A choice that, when you look at some of the other decisions made by the WNBA's front office this season, begins to form a very uncomfortable pattern. The commissioner of a professional sports league does not have the luxury of staying quiet when the league's biggest star is getting punched in the throat on national television. At minimum, you issue a statement. You make a public appearance. You say the words that signal to the millions of fans watching that the people in charge take player safety seriously and are committed to getting it right. That is not a high bar. That is the floor. Kathy Engelbert has not cleared it. Her absence from the public conversation surrounding the Thomas incident has been one of the most talked about aspects of this entire situation. While players spoke out, while fans flooded social media, while sports media spent days dissecting every angle of the footage, the commissioner of the WNBA was essentially invisible. No press conference. No definitive statement drawing a clear line. Nothing that would suggest the person at the top of the organization understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Alyssa Thomas herself made note of this in her podium appearance. She pointed out that, as of the time she was speaking, she had still not heard anything from Engelbert. She described the commissioner's silence as unsurprising, and in a tone that made clear she wasn't particularly shocked. Whether you agree with Thomas's characterization of the incident or not, the fact that a player who just received a league suspension hadn't been contacted by the commissioner is remarkable in the worst possible way. But the silence is only part of the story. Because when you look at some of the decisions made under Engelbert's leadership this season, a pattern starts to emerge that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The WNBA's 30th anniversary commemoration poster was supposed to be a celebration, a visual statement about the league's history, its present, and its future. The kind of promotional material that gets displayed in arenas, shared across official league channels, and serves as a statement about what the organization values and who it considers central to its identity. Caitlin Clark was not on it. Let that land for a moment. The player who brought an estimated 3.2 million viewers to a single broadcast. The player who drove merchandise sales up by a figure that the league had not seen in its entire 3-decade history. The player who was selling out arenas in markets that had been struggling to fill seats for years. The player who had, by virtually every measurable metric, transformed the financial and cultural trajectory of the league within a single rookie season. Left off a poster designed to celebrate the league's past, present, and future. Sophie Cunningham addressed this directly and did not mince words about what it signaled. The decision to exclude Clark while including players with significantly smaller profiles, including Cunningham herself by her own admission, was not an oversight. Oversights don't happen at that level of planning. Promotional materials go through rounds of approval, design reviews, and organizational sign-offs. Someone, or multiple someones, made a deliberate decision that Caitlin Clark would not be on that poster. And the only person with the authority to greenlight or override that decision is at the top of the organizational chart. The argument being made, not just by fans, but by people inside the sport, is that Engelbert is more interested in maintaining a narrative of collective league growth than in acknowledging that one player has been responsible for a disproportionate share of that growth. Admitting what Clark means to the WNBA right now would require admitting that the league's previous marketing strategies, its previous approach to star building and promotion, had not been working. And for a commissioner who has been in the role since 2019, that kind of admission carries personal and professional weight. A commissioner who understood the moment would be doing the opposite. She would be placing Clark front and center in every campaign, every billboard, every league initiative. She would be treating the Clark era the way the NBA treated the Jordan era, as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to permanently expand the league's audience and financial base. Instead, the WNBA's leadership appears to be treating its most valuable asset as something closer to an inconvenient disruption. The legends of the game have noticed. And when they start speaking, it becomes very difficult for anyone to keep pretending that this is all just online noise. When Lisa Leslie decides she has seen enough and speaks publicly, the sports world stops and listens. This is not a media personality with an agenda or a social media commentator chasing engagement. This is a 3-time WNBA MVP, a 4-time Olympic gold medalist, a player who built the foundation that the entire league currently stands on. Someone who competed during an era when physical basketball was genuinely brutal and the paint was treated like a combat zone. Leslie knows the difference between hard basketball and something else. She has lived that difference across an entire career. And when she looked at the footage from June 24th and listened to the league's response to it, she felt compelled to say something. She stated clearly that the officiating in the situation represented a massive failure. Not a minor error, not an unfortunate miss, a massive failure. When someone with Leslie's credibility and standing in the sport uses language that direct, it carries a weight that no press release or social media campaign can manufacture. She is not the kind of person who speaks carelessly about her league. She has spent years as one of its most visible ambassadors, someone who championed women's basketball at a time when getting anyone to pay attention required enormous effort. Her willingness to publicly criticize the officiating structure is a significant moment, and the league's leadership would be wise to treat it as such. Leslie's broader point touched on something fundamental about basketball culture. There has always been an unwritten agreement among players. You compete hard, you play physical, you do what you need to do to win, but if you accidentally hurt someone in the process, you check on them. You let them know it wasn't intentional. You demonstrate through your actions that the goal was to win, not to injure. That basic code of conduct has existed at every level of the sport for as long as the sport has existed. Thomas violated that code in the most visible way possible. She delivered 2 strikes, walked away without a single backward glance, and subsequently stood at a podium and characterized the entire episode as an accident. The combination of the physical act and the complete absence of any human acknowledgement afterward is what pushed this situation beyond ordinary sports controversy into something that genuinely offended people across the broader sports landscape. The historical parallel that keeps surfacing in this conversation is worth examining seriously, because it is not an exaggeration. In the 1980s, the Detroit Pistons built an entire defensive system around making Michael Jordan's life as physically miserable as possible every time he touched the floor. The strategy was deliberate, documented, and brutally effective for a stretch. They called it the Jordan Rules, and it was designed with one specific goal in mind: to beat the talent out of the player who was transforming basketball. What the NBA recognized, and what separates that situation from what is happening in the WNBA right now, is that the league eventually stepped in. The NBA understood at an institutional level that if they allowed the Pistons to physically break Michael Jordan, they would be breaking their own financial future. Jordan's success and the NBA's success were inseparable. Protecting Jordan meant protecting the investment that an entire industry had made in the sport. They adjusted the rules. They changed how the game was officiated. They sent a clear message that the era of organized superstar hunting was over. The WNBA has its equivalent moment right now. The player responsible for the most dramatic growth in the league's history is being physically targeted in a pattern that has been documented, discussed, and confirmed by players, analysts, and legends alike. The league has the playbook right in front of them. History has already shown what happens when you protect the superstar and what happens when you don't. Every young player with the talent and profile to be the next transformational figure in women's basketball is watching how this gets handled. And what they are seeing should concern everyone who wants this league to have a future as significant as its present. Paige Bueckers is about to enter the WNBA. So is Juju Watkins. Hannah Hidalgo is building the kind of college career that makes professional scouts use words like generational. These are the players who will carry women's basketball forward, who will build on what Caitlin Clark started, and who will determine whether the surge in interest that the league is experiencing right now becomes a permanent shift or a temporary spike. Every single one of them is watching what is happening to Clark right now. Every single one of them is processing what it means to be the most high-profile player in the league, and what they are seeing is not encouraging. They are watching the most popular player in the country absorb a closed-fist strike to the throat, a knee to the midsection, a season full of flagrant fouls and targeting, while the officiating structure fails repeatedly to intervene. They are watching the commissioner stay silent during the most significant player safety controversy the league has faced in recent memory. They are watching the player responsible for historic ratings and revenue get left off a poster designed to celebrate the league's identity. They are watching a one-game suspension get handed down for behavior that would have triggered a lengthy investigation and significant penalties in any other major professional league. If you are Paige Bueckers and you are sitting in a room watching all of this unfold, the question you have to ask yourself is a serious one. What happens when I become the player everyone wants to target? What happens when my presence in the league starts threatening the comfort levels of veterans who resent the attention? Will the league protect me, or will I be on my own? Based on everything the WNBA has shown this season, the honest answer to that question is deeply unsatisfying. And that is a crisis that extends far beyond Caitlin Clark's personal experience. It is a structural problem that threatens the long-term viability of a league that finally, after 30 years of fighting for relevance, has something genuinely special to build around. The technical foul situation captures the absurdity of this perfectly. Clark received a technical foul for reacting to abuse. Cunningham received a technical foul for pointing at a referee to ask why the instigator wasn't being penalized. A pointing finger. Not a shout, not a threat, not a physical gesture of any kind. A finger, pointing, that earned an immediate technical. Meanwhile, a closed fist connecting with a player's windpipe earned nothing in real time. The standard being applied is so inconsistent that it does not resemble a standard at all. It resembles a selective enforcement system with a very specific beneficiary. The financial stakes make this even more urgent. The WNBA has spent 3 decades struggling to build the kind of mainstream cultural presence that Clark delivered in approximately 1 season. The merchandise numbers, the broadcast ratings, the arena attendance figures, the social media engagement metrics, all of them tell the same story. The league has been given a gift that most sports organizations would restructure their entire operation to protect and amplify. Instead, the people in charge appear to be more invested in managing internal politics and protecting existing power structures than in recognizing that the opportunity in front of them is finite. Generational talents do not come along on a schedule. You cannot manufacture a Caitlin Clark. You either have one or you don't. And right now, the WNBA has won, and their response has been to hand the people targeting her a 1-game suspension and look the other way. The players who built this league, the coaches who have dedicated their careers to it, the fans who have supported it through decades of financial struggle and public indifference, they all deserve better than this. And so does every young athlete watching from the outside, deciding whether to invest their talent and their career into an organization that still has not figured out whether it wants to protect its future or quietly let it walk out the door. Here is what we know with absolute certainty. A player was struck on a basketball court in a way that went far beyond competitive play. The officials who were paid to protect the integrity of the game did nothing. The league handed down a punishment so light it functioned more as a suggestion than a consequence. A veteran player broke every unwritten rule to tell the truth. The commissioner stayed quiet. And the player at the center of it all, the one responsible for the most significant growth this league has ever seen, kept showing up and kept performing because that is who she is. The WNBA is standing at a crossroads right now, and the direction it chooses will determine whether the Clark era becomes the foundation of something historic or the story of an opportunity that was squandered by the very people who should have been fighting hardest to protect it. The question worth sitting with is this: how many chances does a league get to save itself before the window quietly closes?